In every chapter of history, when power is threatened, chaos follows. Today, the headlines scream that Iran has entered the U.S. Venezuela conflict, and the world trembles at the echo of another threat. This time, directed toward a man who wants to find America dominance, Donald Trump. But beyond the noise, beyond the fear, lies a deeper truth about how the world truly works. Power shifts when fear rules a room. Every moment in history, when nations have changed course, it was never because one side was stronger. It was because one side was afraid. Fear hides behind pride. It wears the mask of courage, but its roots are weakness. When Iran steps into a conflict that doesn't belong to it, when America answers with fire instead of dialogue, when Venezuela becomes a ground where others settle their grudges, it's not a story of power. It's a story of fear. Fear of losing influence. Fear of losing image. Fear of losing control over the world's attention. People often think that fear is what keeps nations alive, that the fear of being invaded or defeated makes them stronger. But fear never strengthens. It only enslaves. Look at every empire that fell. Rome, the Ottomans, even modern superpowers, each crumbled not when they lost resources, but when fear began to guide their decisions. The moment leaders begin to fear losing control, they make choices that destroy their control. They start wars to protect peace. They silence others to protect freedom. They threaten others to protect security. But protection that comes from fear is the same as destruction wearing a different face. When fear rules a room, even the wise begin to speak like the foolish. Advisors become flatterers. Truth becomes dangerous, and diplomacy becomes performance. In such a world, a single word from a leader can start a storm. Iran's involvement in a foreign conflict is not only a political maneuver, it's a mirror reflecting how unstable global power has become. When one nation's insecurity feeds another's ambition, the world becomes a battlefield of egos. Every action becomes reaction. Every decision becomes defense. And no one remembers the true purpose of leadership: to protect people, not pride. The tragedy of power is that it blinds those who hold it. When you sit at the top for too long, you begin to think fear is respect. You mistake silence for loyalty. You believe control means stability, but fear-based power is a fragile empire. It looks strong from the outside, but it's hollow from within. The moment someone challenges it, the cracks begin to show. And the louder it shouts, the weaker it becomes. Nations that rule through fear will always face rebellion. Leaders who command through threats will always be surrounded by enemies. Because fear creates obedience but never trust. And power without trust is temporary. If you want to understand who truly holds power, look at who remains calm when chaos begins. True strength is quiet, not loud. When fear rules, people rush to show dominance. But when confidence rules, they seek solutions. It's the difference between those who build empires and those who build legacies. Empires fall when their leaders let fear dictate their vision. But legacies live when leaders replace fear with understanding. What we see today between Iran, the U.S., and Venezuela is not just a conflict of nations. It's a reflection of what happens when fear becomes the world's decision maker. Fear has no nationality. It spreads like a virus, infecting those who once believed in reason. The question for the future is simple. Will we continue to let fear lead the room, or will we reclaim power by returning to wisdom? Because real power isn't about who threatens the loudest. It's about who leads without fear. And when that day comes, the world will no longer shift because of fear, but because of vision. Ego is the enemy of peace. It has destroyed more nations than bombs ever could. It hides in the hearts of leaders who believe that being right is more important than being wise. When Donald Trump speaks with defiance, when Iran responds with fire, and when the world watches in silence, what we're truly witnessing is not diplomacy. It's ego on full display. Ego turns leadership into a competition. It convinces powerful men that peace is weakness and that compromise is surrender. But history has shown that no empire has ever sustained itself on arrogance. Those who fight to prove they are right often end up proving how lost they truly are. In the corridors of power, ego whispers dangerous lies. It tells a leader that they're the nation itself, that their personal pride is the country's pride. It convinces them that to step back, to admit fault or forgive is to appear small. But peace has never belonged to proud. It belongs to the humble. The humble listen. The humble understand that peace is not a trophy to win. It's a responsibility to uphold. When ego takes command, reason is dismissed and emotion becomes law. And in that moment, diplomacy dies. Look at the way leaders speak during conflict. They don't speak to solve. They speak to dominate. Every word becomes a weapon. Every silence becomes a strategy. The more ego drives a conversation, the less humanity remains in it. Iran's threats, America's defiance, Venezuela's struggle. They are all symptoms of the same disease. Ego has turned leaders into actors performing for cameras instead of caretakers serving their people. The stage may look powerful, but behind the curtain lies fear, confusion, and regret. Ego blinds leaders to the truth that strength is not about who wins a fight. It's about who prevents one. The world doesn't need more conquerors. It needs more listeners. Yet ego convinces the powerful that listening is losing. It teaches them to measure power in destruction, not in creation. That is why so many wars begin with pride and end with tears. No nation ever grows from ego-driven conflict. Every bullet fired in pride is paid for by the innocent. Ego is not confined to politics. It infects every human heart. The moment you believe that you are too important to be questioned, you have already started to fall. The same rule applies to nations. America once led through vision. Now it leads through defiance. Iran once inspired resilience. Now it brandishes revenge. Venezuela once dreamed of independence. Now it becomes a pawn between egos greater than itself. This is what happens when power becomes personal. The world forgets that leadership is not about you. It's about those who follow you. There is a simple truth that the powerful often forget. The higher you rise, the more dangerous your ego becomes. A leader must be strong enough to command, yet wise enough to yield. Ego builds walls. Humility builds bridges. And only those who build bridges can walk toward peace. The day a leader says, "I don't need to win every argument," is the day the world begins to heal. But until then, the ego will keep writing headlines soaked in pride, and the people will keep paying the price. If the world wants peace, it must first conquer ego. Because every war begins with someone saying, "I am right." And every peace begins with someone saying, "I understand." The difference between those two sentences determines the fate of nations. True power is silent. It does not roar. It does not threaten. And it does not need to announce itself. The loudest voices in any conflict are almost always the most insecure. When Iran steps forward to declare its entry into the U.S. Venezuela confrontation and threatens a former American president, it may look like strength, but it reveals something else. Fear disguised as dominance. Real power doesn't come from shouting across borders or displaying missiles on television. Real power is in control, restraint, and understanding when not to react. A lion does not need to tell the forest that it is the king. It simply moves, and the world recognizes its presence. In the modern world, we have mistaken noise for authority. Nations make threats to appear strong. Leaders deliver fiery speeches to look unbreakable. And social media turns politics into theater. But true leadership has never been about volume. MIT has always been about vision. The quietest minds often move the world the most. The strongest leaders rarely make promises. They make progress. The reason silence carries so much power is that it comes from confidence, not fear. When you are truly strong, you have nothing to prove. When you are insecure, you have to keep reminding others of your strength. Think of how nature works. The ocean doesn't boast about its depth. It simply is. The mountain doesn't declare its height. It just stands firm. But the storm screams, destroys, and disappears. In this conflict, the storm is ego, the noise is fear, and the silence of wisdom is missing. The U.S. shouts to prove dominance. Iran shouts to prove defiance. And Venezuela remains trapped between two storms. No one listens because silence has become rare in a world addicted to reaction. True power is about stability. It is the ability to stay calm when others are losing control. When a nation is truly strong, it does not need to issue threats. It creates certainty. The leaders who built peace did not raise their voices. They raised their understanding. The problem with our world today is that leaders think speaking loudly equals leading strongly. But every empire that shouted its greatness eventually collapsed under the weight of its own noise. Power that depends on intimidation is not power, it's panic. There's a reason the wisest people in history were the quietest. They understood that silence creates space for thought. When a leader speaks less, he observes more. When he threatens less, he plans more. Silence is not weakness. It's strategy. The most dangerous people are not the ones who make threats. They are the ones who make moves quietly. When a nation's enemies do not know what it will do next, that is true strength. In this current crisis, every headline screams of power plays and retaliation. But the more a nation talks about power, the less of it truly has. The real strength of a leader lies not in his words, but in his discipline. The ability to say nothing while everyone expects an explosion. That is control, and control is the purest form of strength. The future will belong to the silent builders, not the noisy destroyers. The countries that invest in education, unity, and innovation will rise far above those that invest in shouting matches and threats. True power is not in the ability to start a war. It's in the wisdom to stop one before it begins. Those who understand this will shape the next century. Those who don't will become its lessons. So when the world gets louder with every conflict, remember this. Silence is not absent. It is presence without chaos. True power doesn't need to announce itself. It simply acts, and when it acts, the world feels a difference, not through noise, but through change. In every war, the real battle is within. Nations can fight across oceans. Armies can clash on the battlefield, and leaders can trade threats across microphones. But the deepest struggle always takes place inside the human mind. Before a country decides to send its troops, before a leader signs an order, before a single missile is fired, there is a war inside. A war between reason and rage, between fear and courage, between the desire to lead and the urge to dominate. When Iran chooses to enter the U.S Venezuela conflict, it is not just about power or politics. It is a reflection of an internal struggle, an insecurity that whispers, we must prove ourselves. And the same is true for every other nation involved. America's strength, Venezuela's vulnerability, Iran's defiance, each comes from a battle they are fighting within their own souls. The truth is, wars on the outside are born from wars on the inside. When people cannot find peace within themselves, they project their unrest onto others. Nations are no different. Leaders who have not mastered their own fears create fear for others. Leaders who feel powerless within themselves seek power through control. The louder the threats become, the clearer it is that someone is losing the war within. The bravest act a leader can take is not to attack, but to confront their own pride and anger before it consumes them. The internal battle is the hardest one to win because it has no clear enemy. You can't destroy it with weapons. You can't silence it with speeches. You can only overcome it with understanding. When a leader allows anger to make decisions, disaster follows. But when a leader finds calm in chaos, peace follows. The difference between destruction and progress lies in who wins the battle within first. Every great nation that has fallen began its downfall the moment its leaders stopped fighting for truth and started fighting for ego. Every soldier on the front lines, every citizen living in fear, every diplomat trying to negotiate peace. They all carry the burden of wars that were decided by people who lost their inner balance. Imagine how different the world would be if every leader paused before reacting and asked themselves one simple question. What part of me is making this choice? My wisdom or my ego? That question alone could save millions of lives. But the problem is that it takes courage to look inward. And the world celebrates confrontation, not reflection. The inner battle is not a sign of weakness. It is a foundation of true strength. When a leader wins a war inside, they can lead without hatred. They can see enemies as human beings, not targets. They can see mistakes as lessons, not humiliations. The moment a leader conquers himself, the need to conquer others disappears. That is why the greatest power is not military. It's mental. It's emotional intelligence. It's the ability to stay kind in the face of chaos, patient in the face of provocation, and calm when everyone else is losing control. Every great change begins with someone who chose to master their emotions instead of unleashing them. When a nation learns to channel its anger into innovation, its fear into strategy, and its pride into purpose, it wins the ultimate war. The war within is not about nations. It's about humanity. Because when humans evolve internally, conflicts dissolve externally. The world does not need more powerful armies. It needs more powerful minds. And the first step toward peace is not disarmament between nations. It's disarmament within ourselves. So as the world watches Iran, the U.S. and Venezuela clash on the surface, the real question is not who will win the war outside. The real question is who will win the war within. Because the one who conquers his own chaos will always have more power than the one who conquers land. The world doesn't need more enemies. It needs more visionaries. Every generation produces leaders who fight, but very few who truly see. War is easy. It's vision that's hard. It takes no wisdom to start a conflict, but it takes extraordinary clarity to prevent one. When Iran enters the U.S. Venezuela tension and points its threats to a man like Donald Trump, the world doesn't need another round of accusations. It needs someone who can see beyond the noise. Visionaries are rare because they do not react. They respond. They don't speak for applause. They speak for understanding. They don't lead with emotion. They lead with purpose. And in times like these, purpose is what humanity is starving for. The problem with today's world is not that we lack intelligence or technology. We have both in abundance. What we lack is vision, the ability to see beyond power, pride, and politics. Leaders have become too focused on proving themselves instead of improving their people's lives. Nations spend more on weapons than on education, more on defense than on development. The result is a world full of strong armies, but weak hearts. Visionaries understand that true security does not come from fear. It comes from opportunity. You can protect your borders for a day, but if you don't inspire your people, you will lose your future. The greatest leaders in history were not those who fought the biggest wars. They were those who prevented them. They built roads when others built walls. They looked at enemies and saw potential allies. They saw beyond immediate power and imagined a better tomorrow. But today's leadership has become short-sighted, obsessed with the next election, the next negotiation, the next display of dominance. We have too many politicians and too few visionaries. The world has enough generals. It needs more teachers, thinkers, and dreamers who can lead nations not by fear, but by hope. When a leader has vision, every conflict becomes an opportunity to grow. When Iran threatens, when America reacts, when Venezuela struggles, a visionary would not see enemies. He would see possibilities. He would ask, what lesson is hidden here? How can this tension teach us to evolve? Because visionaries understand that chaos is not the end. It's the beginning of transformation. Only those who can see beyond destruction can create real change. Imagine a world where nations competed in kindness instead of conflict, where innovation, not intimidation, defined strength, where leaders were remembered not for how many battles they won, but for how many lives they lifted. That world is not a fantasy. It's simply waiting for visionaries to wake up and lead. The future belongs to those who can look at a crisis and say, there's another way. The enemy of progress is not the other side. It's the blindness within us that refuses to see solutions. True visionaries are builders. They build bridges where others burn them. They inspire collaboration where others inspire fear. They unite where others divide. When leaders start thinking like visionaries, peace will no longer be an occasional headline. It will be a way of life. The tragedy of the modern era is that people mistake aggression for strength and diplomacy for weakness. But the greatest power on earth has always been the ability to imagine a better world and then create it. The world stands at a turning point. Iran, the U.S., Venezuela each has a choice to make. They can continue seeing each other as enemies and repeat the same cycle of destruction, or they can rise as visionaries and redefine what leadership means. History will not remember those who shouted the loudest or fought the hardest. It will remember those who saw what others could not. The world doesn't need more wars to prove who's powerful. It needs visionaries to prove that peace is possible. When the storm rises, the wise build bridges, not walls. Every storm in history, political, social, or personal, has tested humanity's ability to choose between fear and understanding. In the middle of chaos, it is easy to build walls. Walls make us feel safe. They give the illusion of control. But walls separate, isolate, and divide. Bridges, on the other hand, take courage to build. They require trust, vision, and the willingness to meet halfway. When Iran steps into the U.S. Venezuela conflict, threatening Donald Trump and challenging American influence, the storm is not just between nations. It is between mindsets. One side seeks dominance, the other seeks defense. And both forget that survival does not come from separation. It comes from connection. When storms rise, weak leaders panic and strong leaders pause. The wise understand that no storm lasts forever and that during the chaos, every decision builds either a bridge or a barrier. Building walls may seem faster, but it limits the future. Building bridges takes longer, but it shapes generations. The strongest nations are not those that conquer others. They are those that can connect with them. Empires have fallen not because of invasion, but because they refuse to adapt, to listen, to connect. Iran's aggression, America's defiance, Venezuela's instability.